Okay, let's get started. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So I'm Anna Olds. I am an integrated resident at the University of Southern California, and I'm the current vice president of TSRA. And I will let Dr. Erkmen introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Cherie Erkmen. I'm a program director of the Thoracic Surgery Fellowship at Temple, and Dr. Olds and I have been endeavoring to capture well-being and topics that are really difficult to learn during a training residency and even more difficult to teach as a program director. So we're hoping to fill this gap of understanding well-being. And today I'm delighted to have the panel of people we have, many who I've learned so much from personally, and I'm really excited to hear from everybody on the panel. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Olds.
Thank you. So TSRA and TSDA are very excited to be collaborating on this series. So this has been a wellness webinar series. We've developed kind of a framework through which we can offer webinar topics that would hit on several elements of this framework. And the framework for wellness or well-being consists of the following elements. So that includes progress towards a goal, work commensurate with training, interest and mission, value and social relatedness, interconnectivity, and resilience and rejuvenation. So these elements can be relevant in the professional work setting and also in the personal setting. This is the fourth webinar in our series, and it's on family planning, which hits on obviously many of these topics. So we are super excited about this. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to introduce everybody. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. So thank you to everybody for joining. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to a very interesting discussion. We have Dr. Jaklitsch, who is a professor and program director of thoracic surgery at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Dr. Wolf is an associate professor of thoracic surgery at Mount Sinai, and Dr. Wagner is an integrated cardiothoracic surgery resident at the University of Michigan. I just also want to say our Q&A is open. So if anybody has questions at any time, please feel free to use the Q&A and I will be monitoring that. So let's get started with our first topic. So can each of the panelists maybe just kind of explain their family situations and also anything that makes their participation particularly relevant to the conversation? Dr. Jaklitsch, do you want to start?
I am a program director. I've been able to see firsthand the changes in family planning and a request for leave from the time that I entered medicine in 1986 to the present. I have 5 adult children that were born between 1992 and 1997. So home used to be Camp Chaos, and now it's a library.
Dr. Wolf.
I am the product of training under Dr. Jaklitsch, among other interesting segues. Dr. Erkmen was, in fact, one of the first residents introduced to me by one of my mentors, Dr. Sugarbaker, who pointed out that Dr. Erkmen had just had a baby. And I believe that baby is now 16. I myself have a 17-year-old son who I adopted when I was a 4th-year resident in general surgery. And it's an adventure, but a good one.
Thank you. And Dr. Wagner?
Hi, everybody. I'm a PGY-5 integrated cardiothoracic surgery resident at the University of Michigan. And I have had 2 children during training. The first one as a PGY-2 and became pregnant at the end of my intern year. And then my second I had during my research time. I'm also very involved with Michigan, the creation and implementation of Michigan's perinatal resident policy, and as well as getting feedback from residents about how it works, what we can do to make it better for both residents who are having children and the residents that are supporting the residents who have children. And I'm also involved in the STS task force for family planning.
Dr. Wagner, can you tell us a little bit more about your personal experience of finding out what are the guidelines and what are you allowed to do, and also touching in on your feelings of telling people when you're pregnant and along which stage of your pregnancy?
Yeah, thank you so much for that really important question. So I was very fortunate. There had been, I think, every female integrated resident before me had had a child at Michigan. So I was not the first one to do this. And so I learned and leaned a lot on my senior residents who had kind of gone through similar things to not only tell me or help me understand what policies there were in place to protect residents during pregnancy, but also how to navigate parental leave, both at the institution level and within the ABTS. So that's a very unique situation. I hope that through webinars like this, where we're able to kind of more broadly share our discussions and hopefully generate really great conversation, even if there isn't a resident at your institution who's had a child, you can reach out to other residents to try to build that network and get those questions answered for yourself. In terms of when I shared my pregnancy, I actually shared my pregnancy really early on with the scheduling chief resident. And that was just so that we could try to start shifting my schedule around so that when I was taking parental leave and also in my third trimester, I wasn't on rotations that would necessarily burden a lot of my co-residents. And I don't want to, that's kind of a loaded word, but I wanted to be able to plan ahead so that my absence wasn't felt too greatly by my remaining co-residents. I think once I reached my, was through my first trimester, that's when I shared my pregnancy with my program director and the other residents. It is a really personal decision, and especially for people who have experienced pregnancy loss, it's a really sensitive decision. I think it's completely up to you to decide when that's an appropriate time to disclose that information. But certainly the more advanced notice you can give, the better that everybody else can plan.
Thank you.
I just, as a program director, I want to reiterate that point. I think that's an outstanding balance of what is the dynamic there, because we have a policy that states you should let the program director know as soon as possible, because it is such a sensitive issue. And the statistics of loss of pregnancy in our profession is really sobering, and can't be ignored either. But at the same time, there's planning and there's a lot goes into it. When I was at the University of Minnesota, we had our fourth child, and he went past date, and I had picked my vacation time for the birth, and then he failed 3 inductions. So he actually ended up, it was like comical. Every week, it's like, can I come back to work because, the kid didn't come. So it's all kinds of things that come into balance with when do you know and how do you prepare and how much warning do you get? And the other point I would make is there's also a difference between your state law. So at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're now extending very long paternity and maternity leaves that even exceed what the ABTS wants you to have in your chief year.
Thank you so much. I just want to briefly introduce Dr. Christina Greene. Dr. Greene, I think, is working on her video. I saw her sideways. There you
are. I'm a little sideways for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. But I'll sign in on my iPad, but I don't understand why I'm this way. But I'm Christina Greene. I'm a congenital heart surgeon in Seattle Children's. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you work on your video.
Let
me okay. So actually, Dr. Jaklitsch, would you mind elaborating a little bit more as a program director? What do you expect from the residents? How can their co-residents help them? I guess, what is your expectation in leadership for residents, both male and female residents who are planning for their family?
I will say, as program director, I find little challenge in working with residents other than to support them. My biggest challenge comes from dealing with faculty, some of which came from an era where they were not expected to even be present at the birth of their children. And there are some older faculty that are still in that category. I have to remind them that the most important life event is probably the birth of the child and not the residency. It's not your case tomorrow. It really is the birth of the child is the most important thing, and how can we support? Challenges come when there are multiple people out at the same time. I don't have a quick and easy solution to that other than, we do have bonding time, and bonding time doesn't have to be from the moment of birth going forward. Some strategies have like 4 weeks right after the birth, and then maybe an additional 4 weeks, 6 months into it. These types of things we can try to explore to see what makes sense for each family and still provide the training experience of a resident. I don't want residents repeating years because they're starting a family, obviously. So you have to balance that as well.
Dr. Jaklitsch, I don't know if you've done this in your program, but in my program, we've had trainees take paternity leave, and they've actually asked to delay the paternity leave, not at the time of the birth of their child, but oftentimes their wife has 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and then they're delaying their paternity leave by several months so that when she goes back to work, that they can have that time. So it's something that we've been able to do so far because there's been no overlap, but I don't know if you've offered that in your program or if that's something that.
Yeah, we have somebody who's doing that actually this July. And it's our first experience with it. We do have a policy that says that you have 1 year from the birth of the child to take your paternity leave. And so if a year has expired, then you have lost that accumulated paternity leave. Just like with the vacations, we have the same policy for vacations. So we have 4 weeks of vacation, and you have to take that within the 1 year period of time, or you can't store it up over the course of several years.
So Dr. Wolf, I think I'm really interested in how this changes and what's your experience around the time of adoption, because it may not be so predictable.
I almost feel like my experience is unique, and so I have some sense of guilt in that, as much as there were challenges involved in taking home a baby not at the time of birth, there was some flexibility there too. I met my son Georgie when he was a patient of pediatric surgery service at the Mass General Hospital. I was chief resident. I was a 4th-year general surgery resident, and I initially took him home as a foster child, which actually took several months and allowed for some planning. At the MGH, we would take vacation a month at a time, and so I requested a 1-month maternity leave that I combined with the 1 month of vacation so that I had 2 months to get things set up at home. And I took that essentially between 4th and 5th year. And I needed that time to set up not only childcare, but really childcare for a medically fragile child who has some complex medical needs, including TPN and a number of things that required skilled nursing. That said, with all the challenges of a unique situation like that came the benefits of all the nurses from the Mass General Hospital who volunteered to sign up for the skilled duty nursing. And I essentially had the surgical service at home, which made that easier. And so for all that people say, oh, what a complicated thing you did. I said, no, that's why I had all of this help. The NP from the pediatric surgery service was the Friday person. The Thursday person was the charge nurse from the main unit, and so forth and so on. Over the years, that has become at times more difficult and at times easier. And like anything else, being a parent is challenging. The adoption itself, I actually did not officially complete for another 5 years. And that wound up actually being when I had graduated fellowship. So at that point, I had finished out my time course at the Mass General and then did 4 years combining a sort of research fellowship and then cardiothoracic residency at the Brigham, and was finished with that in July of 2012 when I officially kind of completed the adoption and then moved to New York. So it's a little bit of a unique situation, but I think some of these elements, in discussing these issues with my residents and trainees over the last 12 years as an attending, I see some themes, namely the complexity of childcare, whether you're a single parent or in a two-parent family, and whatever that looks like. The juggling that goes along with that, because inevitably all plans fail at one point or another. So always have a backup plan, which incidentally is Georgie's motto at this point. I must have been saying it for so long that it's one of the first things he remembers. I did learn that a number of institutions and programs actually have these emergency childcare situations set up as part of the institution. And although they may not have regular childcare available to you, they do have some systems in place should you need that backup. So I highly recommend looking into what resources are available, not only for your main, whether it's at-home childcare or childcare at a daycare or at a friend or family's house, but also what emergency backup plans are available. Because, for example, Mass General Brigham used to be partners, and they had a system where they actually had a number of hours and a service available that you could call at any 24 hours a day for an emergency vetted childcare provider who you would pay. But it proved to be a lifesaver through the course of those several years.
That's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Greene, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experience balancing family life as a congenital attending, also with a lab and a clinical practice, and anything that you would advise young trainees, especially considering congenital.
When posed with that question, I don't have a lot of recommendations, as I really wouldn't recommend this sort of lifestyle to anyone unless you really didn't want to do anything else. It's not the easiest path. It's not the least complicated path, but I do feel I have a very rewarding career, home life, and I get to pursue the science and medicine that I've always wanted to. So briefly, I know I didn't introduce this before. I'm Christina Greene. I had my first child at Stanford in an integrated program during my 5th year, and had my second child my first year of congenital fellowship at Boston Children's. And I'm just rounding out my first 3 years of practice in Seattle Children's. And I would say the straightforward answer to that of how you're able to do those things is I have been very lucky in that I've been supported along the way by several different mentors who believe that you can, in fact, pursue all of these things at the same time. And my first job, the setup is such that I'm able to do everything. So I have 3 operative days a week. I have an admin day and I have a lab day. And I'm 100% clinical. So that allows me and my 3 partners, so there's 4 of us, to each pursue an interest. And that's really to the credit of my chief, who has set up his life and our practice this way. And as a result, we each have a niche that we pursue, and mine is basic science, where I run a lab in addition.
Thank you. That sounds very busy.
Yeah,
you had mentioned to me just another little question. You had mentioned to me when I spoke to you at some point that you make it home for dinner most nights.
Yeah.
Do you think that is common? Do you think that is uncommon? What is kind of the expectation for young trainees?
I don't think that's common. Again, I think I've been very lucky. My whole plan of approach for life was to be the best that I could be, so that when the opportunities came, I had first choice. And so I've hustled through my training and everything like that in order to get first draw. And that's allowed me to set up my life the way that I want to have it set up. And so, yeah, and I get my kids ready in the morning. I go in, they get them set for school. Then their dad takes them to school, and I go to work. I round, I do my day. And most days, because of how we set it up, I'm able to be there to have dinner with them, or at least do bedtime with them. And on the rare occasion that transplants happen and cases go late, or people need help or whatnot, then you miss that. But I am present. Maybe not as present as my children would want, because that's become an issue as they get older and they don't understand why I chose this kind of job where I have to go away. That is a question that has started to come up. My eldest is turning 7. So, but yeah, I'm able to set up my life the way that I want. And I think you can. It's all about choices. It's all about choices. There's no prescribed way to do this. It is all about what you want in this world, what's most important to you, and the sacrifices that you're going to make on either end, because that's what it is, right? If you were to ask me, yes, I run my lab and I operate, and I'm a present mom. But if you ask me the last movie I've seen, it's from like a decade ago, right? You make these choices and trades, and so I gave up a lot of those other personal things in order to do work and family and stuff. But I like what I do, and I'm happy in what I'm doing, and I think my family is happy as well.
It's interesting that you are talking about choices, because I remember that Dr. Jaklitsch used to tell us, you have to drive your kids home from school. It has to be a very common thing for you to drive them home, because some days they won't say anything to you, and some days they'll tell you everything that's going on in their world. And so I took that to heart, and I'm so thankful that he said that. And I don't know if it necessarily needs to be driving your kids home from school, but it has to be something routine. And I don't know, Dr. Jaklitsch, do you have other tips or roles that you can dole
Yeah,
out?
it's so the latest thing, because they're adults now, right, is when they come over on a weekend and we're sitting out by the picnic table, and you can't initiate the conversation, right? You have to be the listener. And the conversation usually starts between siblings. And then you find a lot of information. And if you're poker face and you're not inhibiting the conversation, you yourself get drawn in as well. So it never ends. But Dr. Greene, I'll also point out, what resonated with me when you just told that story is there is the dad or mom that is the super mom or dad that your kids at age 7, 8, 9 start comparing you to, right? Why can't you be more like this?
Yeah.
And simple things like pictures of your team at work, can help explain this is where I am when I'm not here. Describing to them what a transplant is. They
know.
That's
Yeah, they know
valuable.
what a type A is. They know the difference between a type A and a type B. They understand a transplant. They know what ECMO is. The conversations you have in daycare is, why is your daughter talking about death? Because the baby died, things like that. Like, yeah, they're very well aware. But they're your kids, right? So you're a high achieving person. Your kids, follow you, and they're rational. They're very rational. My daughter's very rational. Mommy, if you just worked at my school, then we would be together all the time. And then we could go home and you wouldn't have to go back. And, it's a very rational discussion, but it's also, it's hard to explain that, there's parts of you that existed before them, and things you want to do in this world that you aren't willing to give up. as well. You know, like it's that, but it's an interesting journey. It is very rewarding. It is a very rewarding journey. It's also a very painful journey, but yeah, that's why I don't recommend I don't recommend my lifestyle to anyone. But I will say that it is possible. It is possible. I exist, right? Like it's possible.
And I think I would just like to highlight the points that in addition, the points you're making explicitly, but also between the lines, you're spending quality time with them. When you're with them, you're present, you're grounded, you're not on your phone. You're not, scrolling social media accounts. There are plenty of parents who are physically with their children longer than we are able to be with ours. But when what you're describing, the time that you're with them, you're really with them and present, and don't discount how much that means to them. And my father was an accountant. He's retired now. I was the only 8-year-old who knew when tax season was day to day, and because he was never home during that time. But he would that behavior became what I wanted to emulate and sort of set my expectations for what I would be like in my career. And I knew I would wanted to work very hard and that I wanted to enjoy my career. But that it might mean that I was sacrificing actual time at home with my child. And there is that phase where they want you to be there, but you were going to miss that phase. Because Dr. Jaklitsch will tell you, and I'm experiencing it, it somehow transitions to them not wanting you to be around. And you miss that. I now get, are you working this weekend? And I always know any question I get now is loaded. No, why? Oh, so you're not going in? Well, if I get called in, if there's an emergency, I might have to. Oh, okay. So you're going to be gone. And I realize he's either plotting some party or there's something that he's planning to do, but most of the time is not wanting me around. But my point is that just give yourself some credit for really being present and really focusing on the quality of that time together, because that's what's making the difference, because then your kids really will emulate you, all the good.
I love that. That's a super important point. Katie, I wonder if you could comment about that time and balance as a resident and soon to be fellow. And you have a couple of previous fellows and I think current co-fellows who have children. So I wonder if you could comment on that perspective as a trainee.
Yeah. It's also really hard to echo what everybody else has said, but I loved what Dr. Greene was saying about how there's a part of you that existed before them and that you need to honor that part. And I love that so much. There's a part of me that's a mom, but there's also a part of me that is a cardiothoracic surgeon. And, sometimes those things feel like they're at war with each other, but I know ultimately, for me personally, I think becoming a mom has made me a better surgeon, and doing what I love and a career that really fulfills me makes me a better mom. In terms of how I try to take advantage of that time, I have been on research for the last 2 years, so it has been a little bit, it's been a very different lifestyle for me. But I remember, back when I was still clinical, I would just try to soak up every minute, every weekend that I was off. I was only with my daughter. And that comes at the sacrifice of other things. Like I wouldn't go out to dinner with friends or things like that. Maybe I'd see them afterwards after my daughter was asleep, but you do kind of have to pick and choose how you spend your time. And it is, to echo what everybody else has said, it's all about choices and what you value and what you want to prioritize. It's definitely really hard. And in those really hard moments, I lean on my co-residents and, can just vent to them, can just say, this is really hard. Like, I feel like I'm, failing at both of these things. It can really feel like that sometimes. But I think having a support community really kind of grounds you, reminds you why you're doing what you're doing, and just helps remind you that this time away is making you a better person, a better mom, and that you owe it to yourself to dedicate yourself fully to residency, but spend that time with your family when you can. I hope that answers the question.
That was perfect.
It's a hard question, and I think you touched on the idea of finding support, but I think I wanted to ask everybody about one step further, not just support, but asking for help. So we're all very independent and capable and pride ourselves on that. So, this question goes out to anybody. And how did you ask for help, and who did you ask for help, and what kind of barriers did you find?
One of the lucky things that I have is a very supportive chairman and a role model who prioritizes his own family. And it's something I saw in Dr. Jaklitsch very early on as a trainee. That was the type of colleague and partner I wanted to have in my practice. And it's very much what I experienced. So in my first year as an attending, my chairman called and asked me to help. And that he had a family emergency and needed help. And I wound up doing some of his cases and talking to his patients. And it sort of reduced the barrier to me of this intimidation of asking partners for help. And it sort of set the tone for our whole department, as he always has. And all of us have called on each other for help at one point or another. Therefore, there was a period during the pandemic when my son had gotten very sick, and I essentially needed to basically take time off. And he pointed out that I had done the same for one of our other partners, and it just became a practice in our group. So recognizing that we all need to do that at one point or another. So the people you're going to ask for help have either asked you for help or will ask you for help. And so taking away the stigma associated with asking for help, recognizing the importance of situations where you need to be there for your family, particularly in an emergency or something that really requires you to be all present, not distracted by calls from work. There's absolutely no shame in that, and sort of doing that for each other. And really, it's part of, as you choose your jobs, it's something to sort of sniff out among a group in a practice, because some people really are better at being colleagues than others, but it usually becomes a culture in a place, and it's something that I think you should be able to recognize.
I would second that. I think that's spot on. I think it's, you surround yourself with the people that you want to be like, right? So you emulate the chairs that made time for their kids and made that be the expectation of their trainees. Joe Wu was fantastic at this at Stanford. It was the expectation that we help each other. You don't have to ask. If someone needs something, then there should be a handful of volunteers to step in, and that just continued, and that's the practice that I've joined. Like everyone has stuff. It doesn't matter what it is. And there needs to be like a non-judgmental support group that is always got your back. It doesn't matter what it is. Like my whole day, one of the reasons I'm late today is one of my colleagues was dizzy and sick. And so me and my other partner have scrambled our days to cover the case that was going, which was quite long. So, I mean, like, it's just part and parcel of life. And I think that if you lead your life that way, then you will end up in the situation that people will help you and you will help them. And that's what allows you to, get through life, because everyone has stuff. It doesn't matter if you have kids or you don't have kids. We all have other parts of our lives that need attention.
The other point that I would make is I've been very fortunate in having a very strong spouse who raised the kids practically by herself while I was a cardiothoracic surgeon. She's really an amazing individual. So on a daily basis, I get help from Bridget. What became obvious to me was, as a stay-at-home mom, she was missing conversation. I would come home exhausted. She would be exhausted. And you have to make time for each other there too. Yes, you need time with the kids. you need time for that person to have a break from the kids where you're taking the kids. And then the conflicts come when there's a really sick patient at work and there's a family commitment, and you do have to ask for help. And that's trickier, right? Because you got this voice in your head that says you shouldn't ask for help for this. Like if your kid's in an accident, yeah, you can ask for help then. But if it's a matter of giving mom a day off, can you ask for help then? And I think the younger folks are much better at it than we were.
Those are all really great points. I want to also take it a step further and ask, what about help outside of work? How do you logistically manage raising children as a cardiothoracic surgeon? What are the things that you rely on? What are your day-to-day plans? If your kid is sick, what do you do? If you're scrubbed in the middle of the case, you can't really leave. So what are those logistics and childcare supports that you have outside of work for anyone?
For me, my kids are daycare kids. They've been in since 10 weeks of life for the most part. My husband is I am married. My husband is the responsible person in our relationship, meaning that if something happens with the kids, if they get sick, it's on him to come and get them and things like that. We've had a couple instances where he had a meeting that really couldn't be moved or that sort of stuff. Then I'll have a child hiding in my office, but that does happen. But in general, it is my spouse who takes care of that aspect of it, because I'm unfortunately just not reliable in that regard.
I'm kind of the same way, where our kids, we're fortunate enough to live by family, but our kids also go to daycare so that we're not relying on grandparents 40 hours a week. But even when my husband and I were dating very early on, I kind of told him, like, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, and I can't be the person that's taking the calls from school. Are you okay with that? Like, are you okay with being the primary caregiver if we have children one day? I think that was like date number 3. So it might have been a little bit early, but at the same time, when I kind of knew what I wanted in life, and I wanted to make sure my partner was able to support me with that. And so I think if you are partnered, and there's definitely people that do this without a partner, but having them on board early on is really important.
I can speak a little bit to what it's like to do it as a single parent. It's great to have a partner, and it's also even better to have those discussions. That's so mature of you. I wish you could have advised me 20 years ago, 30 years ago now. But I have a setup where there are nurses who help with Georgie's main medical care, but I always have sort of a backup. I have caregivers that are the non-medical people, so there's some overlap. I kind of have always tried to design overlap into the system, and sometimes that overlap has gotten very thin. Sometimes it's non-existent, and I think we've all been at some point or another been in a position where I call it take your kid to work day. I also often refer to something as the trump card, when you just have to drop everything, no matter what that means. And that could mean calling a partner into the OR if it really meant that, and it were that serious and you had to leave what you were doing. But I've always been very, very careful, and thank God to this day, I don't think I've ever actually used it. And I sort of learned early on how that could play out. I think I was scrubbed as a 4th-year resident on a colectomy. And I remember where I was, that all of the nurses and people helping with my son had the phone number to the Mass General. So they could just page me through the paging system. But they knew not to do it unless it was a true emergency. And I guess the nurse was with Georgie, my son. They happened to be at Boston Children's, and he started GI bleeding. And so they called into the operating room to tell us about this GI bleed. And they said, but the gastroenterologist is here. We're on our way to endoscopy. And he's hemodynamically stable. And my attending looked at me and said, do you have to go? And I said, no, it sounds like they've got it under control. And my thought being that, God forbid, someday there's going to be something where I really just have to drop everything. And it doesn't sound like this is that moment. I think now, as an attending and someone a little more seasoned, I would recognize that my assistance in that colectomy wasn't mandate, and maybe I could have left. but my point is kind of, you really do need to have a lot of safety nets in place. I think the people that can sort of replace a partner at home are good friends. And I have been fortunate to establish some really good relationships, not only with my actual friends, but also with the nurses who help take care of my son. So even ones who are not working are often sort of those backup people in a true pinch or an emergency. If something is going on that and I can't be reached because I'm scrubbed, these nurses will often call each other, or my parents will, or whoever's helping with my son can call one of them. And so having a system and being comfortable leaning on that system when you need to is really important, especially for a single parent.
I think it's really important. What you brought up, Dr. Wolf, was that when you ask for help, you're actually creating a bond with somebody else, whether it's your partner or a friend. You're creating this relationship where you feel a trust and that you're asking for help. It's exactly what you said, is that it's just opening an avenue for somebody to ask you for help in the future, and strengthening that type of community is really important. I wanted to ask Dr. Jaklitsch about looking at an arc of career. Is there any time where you feel like, you're looking at your 10-year plan or even your 20-year plan, that, you should focus on academic productivity when they're this age or a teenager, when they get out of the house? Is there anything where you can create some space for academic productivity in the lifespan of a kid, as you've had 5?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. I will say the worst time is your 40s, between 40 and 50, where your practice is not growing at the pace that you thought it should be. The research looks like it hit a dead end. Your kids tell you that you stink as a dad, and your spouse is pretty stressed out and wants to know why you're never around. And those are the dark days, 40s to 50s. But I will assure you, I'm at age 64 now. It gets better. It really gets better. And there are different phases, different challenges. When we were Camp Chaos, the only time the house was quiet was in the early morning. So I tried to get up a little bit earlier than everybody else and had some quiet writing time then, because, proposals, research projects, it's a combination of writing and thinking at the same time. You can't write or think, yet you have to do both. So that was helpful. Everybody has to find a formula that works. Another strategy that I tried at another time was to have the last Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of a month as academic time. I found if I did an academic half day or day once a week, that never worked. There was always administrative stuff that would come crowding in or catching up with notes. So that strategy never worked. But you have to find one that works for you. And an important mentor for you is your partners, because they deal with it also, and they can give you advice how to do it.
Does anyone else want to comment on academic productivity and coordinating that with having children?
I mean, everyone has different needs and kind of an environment that works for you. There's a book called Attention Span by Gloria Mark, which focuses or helps you understand yourself a little bit and kind of take agency of your own attention span and what distracts you and what kind of replenishes your cognitive resources. And it helped me understand myself a little better. You have to find where you're productive. For some people, that's the office. For some people, being home is a major distraction. For me, I always liked being somewhere where there was a little bit of chaos around me, and I realized I could sort of mesh that with my son and his playing video games. And so getting my laptop set up so that I could access my research drives at work was like a godsend, because now I can spend some time with him. He's doing what he loves. I feel some closeness and I just enjoy being around him. And and that somehow an environment in which I can be productive. That's not for everyone. Some people would find that very distracting. And so you just, I think, have to find what works for you. If there is a way to make it work so that you can sort of do both, you're doing neither really well. And that's the truth. Somebody said it earlier about feeling like you're failing at both all the time. I think Dr. Greene did. But I think there's some comfort in not feeling so isolated, at least for me, that's something that works.
I can't tell you what the best way is. I can just give an example as to how I set things up. So when I said that, like, so Tuesday's like my admin day normally, where I have all my meetings, and I'm pretty religious about that. I don't allow my admin to schedule meetings, anything else really outside of that Tuesday or on the tail end of an operative day, for me, because I protect my Fridays, because that's my time to think, and I can't think if I get interrupted, and I can't think and progress my research if I have to do clinical things and that sort of thing. So on Fridays, you know, I'll come in round, see my patients that I operated on, and by, you know, like 9-ish, I'm heading downtown because my lab's downtown, and I'll go to my office downtown, have my lab meeting, have my day, have my whole span there, and then, you know, if I'm not on call, that's what I'm thinking about on the weekend, you know, and that's my frame of mind. So that, like, when my, you know, husband's sleeping in, if the kids are sleeping in, I'm up in the morning on Saturday, and same thing. It's a nice quiet time to be able to write and think, and you get to do some work. And I like to, my you know, driving the kids home is, I like to put them to bed. They finish their day with me. That's where I hear about what happened and all these different things that happened during the day. So I'll read books with them and put them down. And then once they're asleep, usually they're tired enough, it doesn't take so long, but depending on whenever they're done, and you finally escape the room, then I'll sit down in my office and have a cup of coffee and try again, and that's my space to think and do things. But I found, just for me and my personality, I need that segregation, because it's not like, you know, it's not something you can just churn to if you have to think about how to solve some of these problems. The thinking part is hard. So you carve it out however works best for you. Like, that's your choice, and that's your prerogative. But you have the right to, right? The whole goal is for you to be successful. So don't let someone else tell you how you need to be successful. You have to say, hey, listen, like, it really doesn't work for me to have 2 half days. I need a full day because I'm not productive that way. You know, that's what your boss wants. They want you to be productive. They want you to be happy. They want you to be good at what you do. And you have to kind of figure out and set it up how you can do your best. And it'll be different for everyone. But I think that's totally your prerogative to set yourself up for success.
That's great advice. Very personal decision. I just want to ask one last question, and I'm gonna ask it to Katie first. As a resident, and I think others can also jump in here with their experiences, but as a trainee, I think it can be particularly hard to advocate for yourself in terms of changing your schedule. Maybe, you know, we have found there is data that exists that longer shifts, maybe more time in the OR, overnight call, all contribute to the risk of infertility and pregnancy complications. So in light of the fact that it is difficult to advocate for yourself, to schedule those things, but also, you know, if you are pumping after you have a baby and you want to nurse that baby, how do you advocate for yourself? What would you tell other residents who are in that position?
Yeah, it's really hard because you don't want anybody to question your commitment and dedication to your training and becoming a cardiothoracic surgeon. But at the same time, I think that we're often harder on ourselves, or maybe have like preconceived notions of what our attendings or our co-residents or things like that are wanting us to sacrifice, if you will. And I was, again, a little bit fortunate because there had been many people before me who had been pregnant and had actually pumped and breastfed. I breastfed my first child for a full year. And so I was, again, not the first person to do it, but we also had a policy in place at Michigan that almost normalized it. So, and it wasn't, when I approached that discussion with attendings and I'd say, hey, I'm pumping, so I need to leave every 3 hours for half an hour to go and pump. And none of them gave me a hard time about it. All of them were very supportive of that. Many would even have the circulator or the scrub just set a timer so that, I could we could both just focus on the case. And then when the timer went off, then it was time for me to scrub out, obviously, as long as it was appropriate to do so in the case and there wasn't anything, emergent or urgent happening. But I think just having a frank discussion about what you need and with both your senior residents, with your program director, with your attendings, really good communication is key. And I think that conversation may even be becoming a little bit easier. Again, even if there's not a resident that's been at your institution that's been pregnant or breastfeeding, there's so much attention to family planning. There was that recent statement through the ACS. There's a ton of publications, as you mentioned, Anna, about the risks of long shifts to adverse pregnancy outcomes. I think that everyone in our field recognizes, like, we want to change, we want to support trainees in starting a family if that's something that they want to do. And it all just starts with having a conversation about what you need and how you can work together to accomplish that while not compromising patient care.
It's so helpful to have the perspective of people at different stages of their life and training and careers. And so I appreciate everybody's input. And I just wanted to summarize a couple points that we brought up. One of them is that involve your community, and whether that community is people at home or in the workplace, or your program director, that they are much more able to help and support a family if you allow them to be part of that family. And I think also Dr. Greene and Dr. Wolf all brought up the point about having choices and prioritizing things. Sometimes it's children, us, activities, putting people to bed, or deciding to focus on work at any given time. And it's a matter of choices and having the intention ahead of time to make those choices so that it's not just chaos or the crisis of the moment. And I think most importantly, we should all be thinking about jobs and training programs in working environments that facilitate this type of conversation, so that we're not putting ourselves in a job or a training program that is not open to supporting families if families are a priority for you. So this has been so helpful. I've learned so much from everyone in the past and from this webinar as well. And so I'll turn it over to Dr. Olds.
Thank you so much. That was a great summary. I also wanted to say, it sounds like there is never a good time, which I think a lot of people often say. And I also want to say, for the female trainees, advice that was given to me is freeze your eggs. Takes a lot of the pressure off. And I know actually a handful of people who did that a little too late. So for the female trainees and early career surgeons, if that is something that you have access to, that is a recommendation that many people give that I think is useful. And also, as we've heard, to advocate for yourself within your program and just have open, honest conversations about what you need. I'm going to share my screen again and just put up the contact information for everybody. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you so much to our panelists. That was really helpful. I learned a lot as well. The recording will be available on the TSRA YouTube, which is where we'll put the video, and then we'll also put it on the web app, the TSRA web app, and the audio will be converted into a podcast that will be available through the TSRA podcast system. Look out for our next webinar. We don't have a date yet, but that will be advertised. And thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a good evening.
Thank you, guys. I think sessions like this are going to help really advance this.
I hope so. That's the goal. Hopefully everyone learned.
Well.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.